Senator Woodward, how are you?
Just fine today. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming in, sir. I appreciate it. You and I actually did not actually connect, but I testified in front of the Senate Ed Committee just earlier this week, and you were there. You had a question about, I was like, hey, I'm going to see you later this week. This is fantastic. So you're finally here. There is a lot going on in the state of Idaho right now. Holy guacamole, man. Where shall we start? Where would you like?
Well, I'd say I'm glad to see you there in Education Committee. I was glad to hear your passion for the issue, and I was able to pick you out because of your sweatshirt. So, the ranch.
Here
we are.
I have to wear this one today because this gal came in from northern Idaho. She's a resort owner. Like, there are a lot of, influxes of populations, and she was going back to northern Idaho yesterday. I don't know when I'm going to see her again. I had my black one on. I was like, I took it off. I took it off my back.
Off your back.
And then I was like, well, I have the gray one. The black one just hits really hard. I'm ordering more tonight,
good.
I'll get you one when I get them. They're so comfortable, man. Like, people spot them in the crowd too.
I'm a construction worker most of the year, so
you are
in a hoodie, Carhartt's in a hoodie.
Oh, hell yeah, man. These are good quality, and it's a 3-panel hood. Hoodies that have only 2 panels on the actual hood, so there's a seam, there's a crease in the middle of the hood. That's always bothered me. And this company actually does a 3-panel, so you have the 2 coming up on the side and then 1 stripped down. So you have
comfortable.
Way more comfortable. That's right. Nice thick cords there. It's the best.
Look good.
So look, why don't we do this? Let's touch on education to start. I mean, obviously there is the essentially citizen voting mechanism that the governor has put in place. So we can call into the Capitol building and let him know, hey, hit 1 if you like, school choice bill, or hit 2 if you don't, things like that. But you were one of the Republicans that voted against House Bill 93, correct?
Yes.
Talk to me about that, because look, everybody wants better education. We all have different ideas about how we can get that and what's appropriate, but walk me through your thinking.
Well, I appreciate the question because it takes a long time to decide on some of these issues, but and I said it on the floor. I've said it to a lot of people. We have a constitutional obligation to our public schools, that free, thorough, common, uniform system of schools that the legislature is required or is tasked with creating and maintaining. And I'm not afraid to go beyond that minimum obligation, but I feel that we haven't met that minimum obligation. When you look at our past Supreme Court decisions in Idaho, clear back into the 90s, in early 2005, the Supreme Court has told us more than once now that we're not meeting our obligation in regards to facilities. Last year was maybe a watershed event or a real paradigm shift for Idaho, that the state put money out to the school districts for facilities. It's a start, right? And so that's part of my thought process, is that we have not met our minimum obligation. And then I just didn't find that this approach, which we've seen a number of approaches. I was in the legislature 19 through 22, and then out 2 years in the penalty box.
Did you get primaried?
I did.
You got primaried.
Yeah, and so,
but you're back.
I'm back.
All right.
So I was here for some of those earlier attempts at some kind of mechanism, whether it was an education savings account. I think started out with straight up a voucher proposal, and maybe an education savings account. We did put in place Empowering Parents, which is that program that allows people to buy aids, to buy their own curriculum, buy other
resources.
Yeah. Thank you.
It also pays for some like extracurriculars and things like that, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah.
We learned a lesson a little bit early on in Empowering Parents, that you can't just cut everybody loose to go buy a new TV, right? There was some abuse of the system, and so I think most of those purchases now happen on an online portal.
Gotcha.
But we did that a few years back, and so when I looked at this proposal this year, because we're just looking at what's in front of us today, and that was the tax credit. It's really hard when you start to think about all the ways that this system can be manipulated or cheated. And this is taxpayer money; it's public money, and so we have to be able to provide that accountability. And so when we looked at that bill, right now, parents can submit for the tax credit, and they don't turn in any records to show those expenses. they're going to keep those. It's going to be the shoebox in the closet with the records. And so the adjacent taxpayer who's supporting that doesn't have any means to ever verify what those expenses are.
And even if we open up, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but to that point, even if we open up the shoebox, so say there's an audit of you, right? And you're like, well, I got the shoebox of receipts in the closet, and somebody's like, hey, let me see it, right? Like, what you got? All you have to do is hold up a receipt that was like, oh, I went to Matt Todd University, which used to be my SAT company. I went to Matt Todd University. Here's my receipt from Matt Todd University. And whoever you hand that to has to be like, okay, he's got a receipt. Like, there's no verification process that Matt Todd University was teaching any of the required things. There's no verification process that we actually did anything at all, because the bill does not require any kind of, registration as like a registered educational institution or anything like that. You literally just hold up a receipt, and we have no idea what's going on with that receipt. You went into a building or you talked to somebody, like whatever, it doesn't even matter. You just have a receipt. That's all the evidence you need.
That's right. There's another line right above what we're talking about, requires an accredited institution. But if you're not going to that accredited institution, if you're instead in a micro school setup where somebody's teaching a small handful of kids, then just what you're speaking about holds true.
Right. Which I'm sorry if I wasn't being clear. There is a place in there that allows me to just hold up a receipt from someone.
Exactly.
It could literally be like, your receipt comes from me. And you're like, Matt, write me a receipt for $5,000 for tutoring my kid. Now, mind you, I was a tutor for 20 years. I got no problem doing that. Here we go. I hand it to you, and no one verifies that I did anything of educational consequence with your child. Right now, again, whether you have like, I don't have to be an accredited university as an individual to write you a receipt and get that money.
Yep. Yeah. So that was a challenge. There were a few other pieces in there. I actually didn't get to ask all the questions. If you watch the floor session, I did get shut off on asking my questions. So,
well, regardless, you know what? It appears that the bill will pass, right? It appears that
pass both bodies.
Yeah, it appears that it will become law, be signed into law by the governor. At least that's what it appears at this point. If it doesn't, okay. If it does, okay. We are going to find out now, though. This is like all of these things. It's like, I don't know what the right thing to do is. I'm very curious to see, okay, over the next year, as we lead into the governor's race of 26, we will have a full school year of, August 25 to, May or June of 26 to see how this has affected our schools, whether it really is going to be, like rural areas funding Treasure Valley private schools, or whether we'll like usher in this new age of incredible like academic success in the state of Idaho. Like, I'm here for all of it. Like, let's find out. But I mean, it's going to kind of happen.
Well, I think one of the other big pieces of it, when you say what's going to happen in the next year, the program is capped at $50 million right now. And I don't see that staying in place, because if you look at any other tax credit, grocery sales tax credit, I know you've talked about that recently. Yes. Any of the credits, an investment tax credit, if you're eligible for a tax credit, you get the tax credit. And in this case, you may be eligible for the tax credit and not get it because there's a funding pot there that's capped at 50 million. That's really unique in the tax system, to be eligible for a tax credit and not get it. And I could certainly see that being challenged.
Boy, howdy. This is going to be wild.
That's right.
We're going to see. And again, like, I hope whatever Idahoans want comes to pass. Like, if this is what the average Idahoan wants, wonderful. And if it's not what the average Idahoan wants, well, I hope, something gets fixed with it. But like, I'm in it for like, hey, here we are in this ride together. This is what it means to be in a state with other people. And, we go up and down. I mean,
it's a policy question. That's exactly right. And we'll spend about $3.3 billion on our K-12 public education system this year. So 50 million out of 3 billion, 300 million is not a huge piece, but what happens down the road? How does this work out? As we've seen in other states where that number has gotten much bigger very fast.
Yeah. And again, I spoke with Stoney Winston, who's a superintendent of the Fruitland School District. And he was saying in his area, with the 3 different counties and districts that he has, they have something like 4,000 public school students, and fewer than 50 kids go to a private school. or private, whatever. So for him, he literally was like, look, there's no way. Like, we don't have a population density strong enough. We don't have like all these things. Like, we're not getting a robust private school industry in our area. But what is going to happen is some portion of our tax dollars are going to go to that 50 million. So, and we'll see. Like, if it affects people, okay. If it doesn't affect people, okay. Like, it's going to happen.
The good thing is in Idaho, we do our revenues continue to go up. We're a busy state and we're a growing state.
Yeah, we are a busy state. We are definitely growing. Talk to me about the JFAC issues and the funding issues and appropriations.
Sure. So we come into the legislative session every year and we set a budget for the next year.
Right.
There's some frustration right now amongst a number of people because the very first step is to say, what do we think revenues will be for the next year? That revenues are income tax, sales tax, and corporate income tax. And so we have to make a revenue projection and anticipate what the economy will be. We have a small committee that comes in a few days before the legislature starts, spend some time with the economists and so on. So that revenue projection number for the general fund dollars is just a little bit over $6 billion. So what we normally do is set that number, and then we have that number out there all the time. And then as we make decisions, policy decisions about what we want to take on or make financial decisions about what level we're going to fund a program to, we always know we have to stay under that cap.
Right, because at the beginning of the month, you know how much money you got.
We're in week 8 of the legislature, I think. I think we just finished 8.
7 or 8.
And we have not set a revenue projection number. I think it's unprecedented because we're out there putting in place all the components, and then we're going to get forced into a revenue number to make those components, the wants, some needs, but wants, work with the revenue projection number. Why am I talking about the revenue projection number? Because we have a constitutional requirement to balance the budget.
Sure.
We balance it by saying that our revenue, here are our expenses we've budgeted and they match our revenues. But if we figure out all the expenses ahead of time and then just make the revenue number match to what we want, it's clear what I'm saying, right?
I'm tracking you.
Good, thank you.
Listen, I'll tell you what, it's not how I'm able to do the budget in my house. I'm like, hey, here's my fire hose. I'm going to spend and spend and spend, and then just tell the employer how much money I want.
That's a good parallel.
Yeah. And considering I don't have an employer, that would be even worse. Like, I can't. So we have this, but we also, like, we are the fastest growing state in the country, right? Like that's just a fact. And we also, along with that comes obvious growth with you have TechCom, like we have infrastructure growth. We have emergency services growth. We have unprecedented fire seasons that have nothing to do with growth. It's just, this is the way that the world is working. So we have all of these things. And it's my understanding there are people that are advocating for a limited budget growth just based on moral or ethical qualms with it, not saying, hey, we don't need to grow this much because that's not required by, ISP, or we don't need to grow this much because that's not what's required by our Forest Service. They're just saying we shouldn't grow this much because we shouldn't. Because we're
exactly
bad.
Right. It's like it's not acknowledging what is actually going on in the state. And so the result will be our quality of life will change in the state of Idaho. When we're talking about the inflation growth, our budget numbers are going to grow with inflation and they're going to grow with population because a lot of our services are based on how many people are in the state. The one that's, and this is a concern amongst a number of folks, myself included, that we're steering away from Idaho's traditional long game and we're wearing out the farm and we're going to wonder why we can't feed ourselves someday. And so the example I give you, if we start out with what does the state government need to do for us, I think right on the beginning of that list is safety, public safety. And that comes through, one part of that is the Idaho State Patrol. And as I've dug in this year, I've looked back on the numbers. We're not willing to make that investment in Idaho State Patrol to provide for our own safety. If you look back 20 years ago, we had about one trooper for every 4,300 people out in Idaho. That number now is that we have one trooper for 6,300 people. So we don't have that same level of service. I was speaking with the captain who runs up in the north end of the state where I live, with five counties, starting from the Canadian border and coming down quite a ways out through Boundary County, Bonner County, Kootenai, Shoshone, and clear to the south end of Shoshone County. On a typical Wednesday or a weekday afternoon, it's different on a Friday night when there's more activity, or Saturday night, but on a typical weekday afternoon, there are 3 cars in 5 counties. Does that sound like we're meeting our obligations to the people of Idaho? Even if you have a non-injury accident, you expect that when you call 911 and you want to at least determine fault because you're going to deal with an insurance agent, you expect that a car will show up. But if that car is over 100 miles away, if that trooper is not going to make it there, that we're shirking our duties. It comes into play in this budget process where we're trying just without a real trying not to grow government, because that's a mantra of conservatism. Is that a mantra of conservatism, or is conservatism taking care of the requirements that we've laid out, being fiscally responsible and spending wisely, but still providing for the services that we've agreed upon?
I think that's a really good point. I always viewed conservatism as avoiding growing government needlessly, right? Like the criticism, I talked to a lot of law enforcement people, and even somebody recently who got a hold of me, not a law enforcement person, but an advocate, sent me a note, and is criticizing the prison populations and saying, people frequently say, like, we need to have fewer people in prison. And when I talk to law enforcement people about this, they're like, so like, you want us to catch fewer criminals? Like, what is it you want, right? Like, let's say everybody in our jail system right now is a murderer, and you're like, we need to have a smaller prison population. It's like, okay, so which one do we let out, right? So we will inherently, let's make the gross assumption that our community does not like get morally better, or we have the same number of bad actors. As our population grows by 10%, you would assume that our prison population also grew by 10%. It's like, okay, we could just do a worse job of following up and catching people. But again, it shouldn't be that, hey, we're growing our corrections budget, and I morally object to growing the corrections budget, because that means there are more people working in corrections. We're spending more money. We're building more buildings. It's like, okay, so which of the murderers do we let out to make sure we don't grow our corrections budget, right? So
good way to ask the question.
Yeah, it seems like a tricky thing.
It is, and so part of this conversation in this budgeting process, where I talked about revenue projection number, we're still talking about tax cuts. And so we're cutting the tax rate. I said sales tax, income tax, corporate income tax. Sales tax, we know it's been at 6% for quite some time now, since 2006, when we adjusted upward from 5% to 6%, made that change in our school property tax methodology. So we're at 6% on sales tax, and income tax only about 7 years ago was at 7.4%. And as we have ratcheted that down in a number of increments. We're at 5.695 now, and the proposal this year is to take that down to 5.3%. At some point, you have to ask the question, though, were we wrong before, when it was at 7.4 or 7 or 5.8? Was that number wrong? Because we're collecting a percentage, and that percentage is an indicator of what is going on out in the Idaho economy. And so what I really believe is going on is that all of our growth makes it easy to mask that deficit spending, that we're not keeping the infrastructure caught up with what is going on out in the state. And what's going on out in the state is indicated by what you collect in sales tax and income tax. So we're knocking income tax down, and I pay income tax, believe me. I'd prefer not to pay as much as I pay, but I also know that I want a road that works. I'd like to have a police officer out there on that road, all those different services, fire, EMS, the different things, the prisons that are part of society. That's just a reality. And so I just question how much lower we're going to bring the tax rate down, and at what point are we going to start to notice and feel that we've not kept up with maintaining Idaho.
I was talking to somebody today about the position that towns and localities are in that Medicaid expansion repeal. Now, again, I'm not for or against it. What is very clear, though, is that with Medicaid expansion getting probably repealed, because the reform is actually a repeal bill. Like, you have too many things that you won't be able to actually accomplish, like, again, federal judges and other states to overturning their own rulings. It's like, all right, we're not going to be able to do that. So let's make the gross assumption that Medicaid expansion is going to be gone. Okay, like, fine. What happens then is a lot of things that are provided for in that Medicaid expansion, like indigent, did I say that right?
Indigent,
not indigent, indigent care. And that's care of people that are mentally unfit to care for themselves and things like that. That is, well, that we're insured under Medicaid expansion, they will no longer be insured. Now, prior to Medicaid expansion, prior to the ballot initiative that put it on, that was covered. Those services were covered by property taxes in specific taxing districts and whatnot. And this whole problem comes to bear where it's like, okay, we're going to kick expenses back to localities, right? We're going to take it off the state and the federal government, and we're going to kick it back down to, like, Meridian or Eagle or whoever, Ada County, whatever it might be. But then we're also going to limit, as a state lever, we're gonna limit how much those localities can increase or decrease their budgets. And so you have this kind of catch-22 where it's like, okay, you want me to be responsible for more things, but you also want to artificially minimize how much I can increase my budget. So when you have, for instance, like Star going from 11,000 people to roughly 22,000 people in 4 years, you have Mayor Chadwick, they're saying, like, guys, we just doubled in size and I can't double the revenue for these services. Neither can, the Star Fire District had that problem where they're like, listen, we have mitigation fees and impact fees. Fine. That's all well and fine. We need a new firehouse. I can afford the building. I cannot afford to actually hire people to work in the building. So you have these ongoing expenses. Like, we don't have the money in our budget.
You're talking about the limitation on taxing district growth of 3% per year.
Yes, exactly. So 389, I believe it is. And again, yes. I don't know anything about these things other than this puts everybody in a weird position where the state is limiting how much people can increase budgets. But then with, for instance, like Medicaid reform, that will dump more expenses onto that specific area. And they're like, well, how are we going to care for all this stuff?
Yeah, it is a challenge. When Medicaid expansion was put into law by the 2018 Citizens Initiative, you're right. We had two funds prior to that, one local and one state, catastrophic fund and indigent fund. And I get the name swapped back and forth as to which one was local and which one was state, but both of those mechanisms are gone, I believe. And so how do you transfer back if the Medicaid expansion is repealed? If we put in place these demands that the government, or that we get these waivers, and if the waivers don't happen, and the 11 waivers are so unlikely that they would all be authorized, that it's essentially, as you said, repeal. So I always like to share with folks, I have a little bit of an interesting history on Medicaid expansion, because I campaigned in 2018, the first time I ran for the legislature, and campaigned openly opposing the Citizens Initiative, and didn't think that the Medicaid expansion was the right answer. But the citizens of Idaho voted right around 61.5%, I think, somewhere in there, 62% to support putting in place Medicaid expansion after 8 years of the legislature bouncing it around and not ever coming through on taking any action. When the citizens said yes, then I've followed that and taken that as my duty to honor the vote of the citizens. So that's where you'll see me again this year, just so people know.
And that is an interesting thing as well that I was talking to somebody else about. They're like, listen, were the citizens wrong? right? We have a republic, right? Like we hire people or, elect people and you get paid. But the point is we have people represent us. And the state of Idaho felt that the representatives were not effectively representing. They had their voice heard. And now it's, hey, we're going to take this thing away. You were wrong. And I'd like to know, like, what was it about it that how were Idaho citizens wrong about what Idaho citizens wanted? And, is it a fiscal thing? Like, because just like we're talking about, we're going to spend money on catastrophic events and indigent. I can't, I'll never get it. Anyway, we're going to spend money on this one way or another, right? Like, so what is it? How is it that Idaho citizens, were wrong? And direct democracies are problems, obviously. Like, that's not a great idea, but explain why it's a problem here.
Yeah, that's right. I firmly believe the citizens initiative should stay as it is. It's the citizens holding on to the checkbook at the end of the day to have that last say on anything in the state of Idaho, because we're looking again at some efforts to tighten up restrictions on the citizens initiative. The citizens initiative, the things it has brought us that people are uniformly agreed upon, the Fish and Game Commission, homeowners exemption, that was a citizens initiative. And we've fallen behind on the homeowners exemption in updating the amount of that, because if you look at the original citizens initiative, it was a cap of up to 50% of the value of your home, and that amount of the homeowners exemption was right at 50% of median back when it was put into place. And now we have the homeowners exemption at $125,000, and median home is somewhere between $450,000 or $500,000, depending on where you are. So if we were honoring the intent of the citizens initiative with the homeowners exemption, we would have it somewhere up at $250,000, 250,000. That's my take on it.
There's a lot here. Senator Woodward, I've had you for a little bit here. I know it's a working day. You stepped out of the Capitol. Come talk to me. I really appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to hit here at the end?
Well, I do want to talk just a little bit about,
please,
an effort that we just started with. Well, we made a first step this morning. We've been working on it. I've been pushing for 5 years. We've been working within a group of folks for over a year, but it's in regards to our electric utilities here in the state of Idaho and wildfires. And we've seen in other states where some of the utilities have been bankrupted.
California.
Yeah, some other states. And so we want to get ahead of that here in the state of Idaho. We have electric utilities. They do have their designated service areas. You don't have a choice to go somewhere else. If that company goes bankrupt, you don't have a choice. You only have a choice that you're going to pay more to come out of bankruptcy. And so oftentimes that scenario is that a small group of people are then making their neighbors pay for every wish and desire they've ever had. That's kind of pushing what I'm saying there a little bit, but
and again, the idea is, hey, look, we have a town of 1,000 people, and we have a little utility that provides power. And some of the horrible situations that we've seen in other places in rural areas is like, listen, aging infrastructure, aging power lines, something happens, and a spark leads to a giant fire takes over, and, God forbid lives are lost, but housing and property, the whole thing, right? So it causes a huge catastrophic amount of damage. It is determined then that it was like a spark from, an aging power line. That leads that utility to go out of business because they get sued by people for negligence, right? It's like they're found negligent, and all of a sudden they're like, all right, well, look, you guys don't have anywhere else to go get your power.
Well, and in the negligent, this is the bill that we're working on is in the case of negligence, there is liability.
Oh, sure.
But the scenario that we're looking at is to simply define a standard of care. Here's what the industry standard is, that you will replace your poles in this periodicity.
Right.
That as much of your system will be underground as possible.
Whatever good faith actions in an appropriate manner can limit the capacity for somebody to articulate negligence. Because it's like, whoa. Yeah. I did all 20 of these things.
That's it.
We live in an inherently dangerous situation where I'm running power across these lines, and nature, Nature happens, like something. But again, in the current iteration, there's no capacity for the power companies to say, hey, in good faith, we have done all of these things, so we should limit the ability for somebody to argue negligence. Right now, they're just like negligent, and there's no way for the power company to fight back.
That's it. That's the scenario. And it is with the Idaho consumer-owned utilities, all the rural electric co-ops and municipalities are the ones that are taking the lead on this. I'm a board member of a rural electric co-op, which is the Northern Lights Electric Co-op up north.
Look at you.
Yeah,
Look at you.
Been doing it for 10 years.
Northern Lights Co-op. I see what you did there.
Northern Lights. Actually, the oldest electric co-op west of the Mississippi.
Look at you.
I love that. I love that fact.
I love that for
It's
you.
a fun fact.
That's a great fact.
Yeah, the co-ops come about from when the farmers strung up their own power lines, right? 1932, I think, was the Rural Electrification Act, provided a financing mechanism. So these are homegrown businesses, and so we can't just let a few members so severely affect the rest of the members who are interested in having that safe, reliable, and affordable electricity. Lest
we accuse overzealous trial lawyers going after good faith work that power companies are doing. Yeah, this is one of those things. Again, that's one of the great secrets to what I found to be the Idaho way of life is an affordable, manageable way of life. Now, again, there are a lot of people, I'm sure, that are screaming right now saying, hey, things have become less affordable. Yeah, I believe you. Like 100%, just you were talking about with housing. It's like, yeah. And again, I'm part of that problem. I take full responsibility. Like I moved here, I'm sure in some tiny way or large way, I drove up the housing market. Like I get it. But other things are still affordable and could be preserved in that manner as well.
That's exactly it. We're so fortunate here in the Northwest that we enjoy these really low power energy rates. We want to keep it that way, and so we're trying to get out ahead of it, not to take away liability, but to set the conditions on when a utility is liable or not.
Right. Senator Woodward, I appreciate you. Please come back. Let's keep talking.
Okay.
We'll have to do a roundup at the end of March. Do you think we're going like halfway through April? What do you think?
Oh gosh. It might be a bit.
It might be a bit. Somebody told me they were optimistic it would still be March 25th. I'm like, there's no way. It's going to be March 25th.
No, I don't think so. I was here for the session when we had to take a break and come back.
Yeah.
And that was long.
How far did that go? Into like May?
We were well out into May. Yeah.
I can't last until May. I can't do 4 to 6 interviews a day until May.
Everybody gets pretty squirrely, pretty antsy.
Take whatever you want. I don't care.
People are ready to go home and take care of the ranch or the...
Yeah, right. Whatever their obligations are.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for coming in today. Let's do it again.
All right. Thank you.